I spent a few months on the overnight shift at my old job, filling in an emergency hole in the schedule. I usually worked during the day, when the store was very loud, crowded and busy, so feeling the long periods of silence in that store during the night was kind of surreal. The partner I had most nights wasn't a talker. In fact, he was usually dead silent throughout the shift, so the store was uncomfortably quiet whenever there were no customers, aside from the radio quietly playing in the background when it was working anyway. I started to notice things I'd never noticed before during all my years on the crazy day shift. Most of it, I found explanations for. Various machines, fans, etc. that made noises that were not noticeable in the background during the day and kept spooking me during the night. Some sign flapping or scraping against the wall when events kicked on. A quiet customer we had forgotten was still in there until they dropped something or coughed and startled us. Things like that. But there were other things. The entrance doors made a certain squeaky noise when opened and a little bump sound when they settled closed again. The squeak was a sound we listened for when we were both away from the counter and keeping our ears open in case a customer came in. The weird thing was, we hear that sound so many times, the exact sound of someone yanking the door open and stepping into the store. We'd rush to jump behind the counter, and a lot of times we'd realize there was no one there. The doors were still closed. They closed slowly. There was no way they'd have closed and settled already in the 2 seconds it took us to get within view of them. No bump sound either. The doors definitely hadn't moved. I'd assign all kinds of explanations to it. Maybe the wind moved the door just enough to squeak and the footsteps we heard were actually just our own, but it wasn't windy outside. Maybe we were just stressed out and sleep deprived and hallucinating, possible. Maybe it was one of the vents or something and we were mistakenly assuming it was the door. And then one night it happened while we were both standing near the doors. We heard the sound, clear as day, and looked right at the doors in response, both of us simultaneously. Squeak, step, keys on the counter. But the doors didn't move, there were no keys on the counter, and no one was there. We just stared at each other for a minute. Hypervigilance in a stressful environment, because we're always expecting to hear that sound? Yeah, maybe. But a genuine shared hallucination? Unlikely. Other than that, there were frustrating things we couldn't explain. Things would change position or fall suddenly without explanation. You can only tell yourself so many times that you must have bumped it or set it down awkwardly enough to fall before you're very sure that this time you didn't, and you get chills when you find it, again, smashed on the floor, under/behind something else when you were literally just using it, or suddenly upside down or on a different shelf. Not just little things that could have been moved by a breeze or bumped without realizing. It was also happening with large boxes pushed far back onto a high shelf that would require bringing the big ladder to even reach it, entire cases of soft drinks we hear smashing onto the cooler floor while neither of us had been in there. One time I actually witnessed it, an entire case of glass bottles just flipped from the shelf and smashed on the floor, horrible mess. One of the morning people witnessed it too. We were just changing shifts when it happened, but he wouldn't admit it, so. Then no one believed me. They yelled at me for being childish and lying about something I dropped. And some extremely heavy boxes that could not have been moved, pulled down or turned over without putting serious muscle into it, like the soda syrups for the machine. No one would want to bother moving any of them unless one got empty and we had to, and we certainly knew better than to leave them teetering on the edge of the shelf or let them hit the floor like that. It was getting weird. Always something broken, moved, or missing. During the day, we'd blame each other, assuming someone was just being careless. But at night, when I was the only one to touch these things and I knew I hadn't bumped or moved that thing, I was a little freaked out. The hallway leading to the boss's office randomly got extremely cold for no reason, and there was often a weird pressure in the air that made our ears ring. Maybe it was electronic interference, but there really weren't any things there that could be blamed, and the lights flickered or burned out very often around that spot. While I was in that area looking for something, I'd keep looking around and yelling, "I'm here. What do you need?" because I thought I heard something move, or someone approaching or calling my name around the corner, but there was never anyone there. It was well known that even during the day we all hated going into the boss's office if he wasn't in there. The air always felt heavy and strange, and we always got the feeling that someone was standing behind us watching what we were doing, almost leaning on our shoulders. It was creepy even being in that hallway when the door was open. It felt like someone was watching, or about to step out the door toward us. The boss laughed at us, but even he complained that it was freezing in there all the time, and it seemed like he made a point not to sit in there alone any longer than he had to. He was a big mountain of a guy, the type who doesn't own a winter coat and wears shorts all year because he doesn't get cold easily. Yet he kept heaters on in that room all day and still complained that he was too cold. He also couldn't figure out why the cameras would get staticky or go black for no reason, and why certain ones would turn on, motion activated, in various areas where no one was. One of the TVs on the sales floor, always the same one, but never the others, would seem to short out, go black and refuse to turn back on around the same time every night. I assumed that one was on a timer for some reason, but the boss insisted that it wasn't, and one morning he showed me the cable that had come unplugged. It was being unplugged around the same time, every night, and it was so strange because neither of us on the overnights ever touched it. It was suspended from the ceiling, and you'd have to be much taller than average, or climb up on something, to just reach up and pull the cable out. Neither of us was that tall, and I have noticed if my partner was dragging the ladder around. The only person tall enough to reach it was the boss, and by that time he would be home sleeping. We definitely would have noticed if he was there. During the night, I'd see the light go on and off in the office pretty frequently, motion-activated light, and I'd sometimes hear the TV in the office blaring. The office door was required to be closed during the night for security reasons. It had an electronic lock that no one on the overnights were allowed to have the code to open, and the TV remote was kept in a drawer inside the office. At first I assumed the evening manager had just left the TV on by mistake when he left for the night. He did have a habit of zoning out watching TV in there when he could get away with it. But even I didn't believe myself as I said it, because I was hours into the shift when I heard it, and it was silent behind that door before then. And even if that were the case, it still didn't exactly explain what kept activating the light. Maybe the changing images on the TV, but then again, the boss usually had the TV on during the day, and if he wasn't in the office for a few minutes, the light would turn off. The TV didn't really seem to affect the motion sensor on the light. So, something was moving in there. Something kept activating the light. We hear it often. Little things, like the boss's chair creaking like someone sitting on it had changed position. Papers sliding off the desk to the floor. The fax machine beeping like someone was pressing the buttons. Weird commands coming up on the registers, the safe or the backroom printer, as if someone was messing with the boss's computer in the office. The office was the only room at the end of a hallway that was otherwise only for storage. A room with thick cement walls, no windows, and a locked security door. A room that a person would have had to walk past everything and everyone to get to. A door that beeps and clicks when it's opened. It just didn't make sense. If someone had gone in there, we would have noticed. And it would have been someone we knew and trusted, because who else would have the code, so there's not much reason they'd hide from us. Some vermin infestation we weren't aware of. Maybe, but stores like that are checked and preventatively sprayed pretty often. I mean, it's always possible, it happens, but there would eventually be obvious evidence of it. Wild animal that got in from outside? I doubt it. There wasn't really anywhere in that tiny office that it could be hiding all day unnoticed, and it wouldn't have gotten all the way from the front door to the back office without anyone seeing it. A sneaky manager? Possible, but again, we would have seen them come in, and even if we didn't, the cameras would. But no! Nothing. Many times I'd be out on the sales floor, stocking and cleaning the machines, etc., and I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye and then be confused because when I turned to look they had disappeared. I'd run and look around the back room / bathroom / cooler, thinking someone was sneaking where they shouldn't be again. It was a recurring problem during the day, so that was my natural assumption, but I was always creeped out to find there was no one there. So many times during the nights I'd turn around and bump into someone that I had no idea was right behind me, and when I stepped back and apologized, I was chilled to the bone to realize I was alone in the room. I'd look for my partner and find him doing something out in the parking lot, or up to his eyeballs in dishes in the back room, so who the hell did I just bump into? Often I hear someone tap their coffee cup or drop their keys on the front counter, typical when someone was ready to check out but we were busy elsewhere, and then wanted to get our attention without the dreaded "excuse me." I'd hear that familiar sound and motion to my partner to go help them. He'd walk halfway to the counter and turn to look at me, confused, and I'd look around and realize we were alone. There was no one at the counter, there was no customer anywhere in the room. He thought I was nuts. My coworkers from the daytime thought I was just messing with them to freak them out more about the office. Until that night. The usual work, the usual partner, the usual silence broken by the occasional weird noise or falling box, relieved that the radio was working again. It was about 3 a.m. and I was in the dreaded hallway, digging through the shelves for some supplies I needed. I felt someone walking very close to me, and the radio sounded strange, as if two songs were playing at the same time. Then I noticed a shadow under the office door. I'd seen it before but brushed it off as just my eyes playing tricks because I wasn't used to being awake at that hour. But by then I adjusted to the sleep schedule and was quite sure that I was actually seeing weird things. So this time I looked closer. Someone was walking behind the door, and I realized that extra song wasn't coming from the radio. Someone was humming to themselves in the office. I laughed and jokingly called out to the evening manager, teasing him for falling asleep in the office like I assumed he had. I banged on the door and joked that his wife would kick his ass for making her worry. "It's 3 a.m., dude. Go home." The humming stopped. Silence. I knew instantly I'd made a mistake. It wasn't him. He would have responded and opened the door. And I had seen him get in his car and leave hours ago. No one else could have possibly gotten through that locked door except the boss, and he wasn't one to walk in without announcing himself, nor would he close the door all the way like that, especially that late at night. It wasn't him. I was frozen for a minute, staring at the shadow under the door. Pacing and bustling around in there, silent and creepy. My partner came around the corner just then to start his next cleaning job and glanced towards the office door when he saw the way I was fixated on it. The shadow moved again. Someone was walking around in the office, and now I wasn't the only one seeing it. My partner's eyes bugged out. And then the humming resumed. We looked at each other and noped out of there fast, skipping some of our duties that night to avoid going back there. Now I knew I wasn't imagining it, and we were both freaked out. When I told everyone in the morning, this time with my partner nodding in agreement and looking spooked, they all freaked out. The boss didn't want to sit in his office alone for a while, and some of the supplies we frequently needed were moved to different areas so we could more easily avoid the hallway. I went back on the day shift shortly after that and was relieved to be too busy in the chaos to notice those things anymore, but I did warn my replacement about what we were experiencing during the night. He laughed at me until the night he started seeing it too. Then he started skipping some of his job duties a lot of nights and didn't want to say why. Eventually, I moved on from that job, not for fear of the ghost. That was really the least of the problems in that place. From what I heard from the others, the weirdness continued during the nights and still does. And there have been some promotion offers turned down because no one wants to be in a position that involves sitting in the office. I can only imagine